At holiday lunch, Mom told me to leave and stop relying on the family. She actually pointed a manicured finger at the door and said I was embarrassing her in front of the investors. I quietly packed my bag. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply walked to my car, unlocked my phone, and announced that they had just lost every financial benefit I provided. Her face went blank. By the time I started the engine, their world was already crumbling. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Zora. I am 32 years old, and to my family, I am a failure. I drive a 5-year-old Honda. I wear hoodies and jeans. I work from home. In the eyes of my mother, Mama Joyce, and my older sister Tasha, I am the black sheep who never quite launched. They do not know that my hoodies are $2,000 Italian cashmere. They do not know that my work-from-home job is forensic financial auditing for Fortune 500 companies. And they certainly do not know that the luxury lifestyle they flaunt on Instagram is entirely funded by the monthly transfers I make into my father's retirement account. It was Easter Sunday. The driveway of my parents' house looked like a luxury car dealership. Tasha had parked her G-Wagon right in the center, blocking everyone else in naturally. I parked my Honda on the street to avoid the drama. Inside the house smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. Mama Joyce had gone all out. She was wearing an oversized pastel hat that probably cost more than my first car. And she was directing the catering staff like she was royalty. I walked in holding a bottle of vintage wine I had brought as a gift. I had barely stepped onto the marble foyer when Tasha descended the stairs. She looked me up and down with that familiar sneer. Zora, seriously. Tasha sighed, smoothing down her designer dress. It is Easter. Could you not have put on something that does not look like you slept in it? This is cashmere, Tasha, I said quietly, placing the wine on the side table. It is a hoodie, Zora, she snapped. Kyle is inviting the Sterling partners over later. These are serious investors. We are trying to close a seed round for Kyle's new venture. We cannot have you looking like the help. I walked past her into the dining room. Kyle, my brother-in-law, was already seated at the head of the table nursing a scotch. Kyle is a man who uses a lot of buzzwords like leverage and crypto, but has not actually made a profit in 3 years. He did not even look up when I entered. There she is, Kyle muttered. The freelancer. How is the data entry business going, Zora? Still scraping by? I ignored him and went to take my usual seat near the end of the table. But before I could pull the chair out, Mama Joyce rushed over. She literally put her hand on the back of the chair to stop me. No, 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 Mama Joyce said, her voice tight and hushed. Not there, Zora. That seat is for Mr. Sterling. We need the table to look successful today. I looked around. There were 12 seats. There were only 6 of us currently in the room. Where do you want me to sit, Mom? She gestured vaguely toward the swinging door that led to the kitchen. Maybe you can grab a plate and eat in the kitchen nook, or just, stay out of the way until the guests leave. We need to project a certain image today. Excellence. Opulence. You know how it is. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It was not anger. It was clarity. For 10 years I had paid the mortgage on this house so they could project opulence. I had paid Tasha's car note so she could project excellence. So I am not allowed to eat at the table I paid for. I thought, but I did not say it. Instead, I looked at Kyle. He was smirking. Listen, Zora, Kyle said, leaning back and swirling his drink. It is nothing personal. But you are 32. You are still driving that beater car. You are still single. You are still relying on Mom and Dad's generosity for these meals. It just brings the vibe down. We are talking millions today. You would not understand the conversation anyway. I stared at him. The room went silent. The only sound was the clinking of ice in his glass. Relying on the family, I repeated slowly. Yes, Mama Joyce chimed in, fixing her hat. Kyle is right. You need to grow up, Zora. Stop relying on the family for your social life and your meals. It is time you stand on your own 2 feet. If you cannot dress the part and contribute to the success of this family, maybe you should just leave. I looked at Tasha. She was checking her makeup in her phone camera, indifferent. I looked at Mama Joyce. She was glaring at my hoodie with pure disgust. I looked at Kyle. He was arrogant, bloated with false confidence. Okay, I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used when I told a CEO he was going to prison for tax evasion. Okay, what Mama Joyce asked, confused by my lack of begging. Okay, I will stop relying on the family. Immediately. I picked up my purse. I did not take a plate of food. I did not take the vintage wine back. I just turned around and walked to the front door. Good choice, Kyle called out after me. Do not let the door hit you on the way out. I walked out into the crisp spring air. The sun was shining on the manicured lawn that my landscaping fees paid for. I walked to my Honda, got in, and locked the doors. My hands were not shaking. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I navigated to the standing transfers section. Mortgage payment for 124 Oak Street. Cancel. Lease payment for Mercedes G-Wagon. Cancel. Utilities and country club membership. Cancel. Family cellular plan. Cancel. I tapped the screen with the precision of a surgeon. One by one, the lifelines were cut. I watched the confirmation messages pop up. Transfer canceled. Auto pay disabled. Then I opened the credit card administration portal. The black card that Kyle carried in his wallet, the one he used to buy that scotch, was a supplementary card on my account. I had told them it was a perk of my company that I got points if they used it. They never asked why the limit was so high. They just spent. I clicked on Kyle's card. Status active. I selected lock card, report lost or stolen. I did the same for Tasha. And finally for Mama Joyce. I took a deep breath. It was done. The safety net was gone. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb just as a sleek Bentley pulled into the driveway. The investors had arrived. I glanced at my rearview mirror one last time. They were about to have a very expensive lunch, and for the first time in a decade, they were going to have to pay for it themselves. I was halfway down the block when my phone lit up with a notification. It was not a text from my family. It was an alert from the Credit Monitoring Bureau. A hard inquiry on my credit report. I frowned. I had not applied for any loans. I pulled over to the side of the road and opened the alert. My heart stopped. The inquiry was for a $200,000 business loan. The applicant was me. But the digital signature timestamp was from 10 minutes ago, while I was sitting in the driveway. I zoomed in on the application details. The loan was co-signed by Kyle Vance. They had not just kicked me out. They had stolen my identity. I looked back toward the house. The sadness evaporated. The professional auditor in me woke up. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a crime scene. And I was the lead investigator. As I merged onto the highway, putting distance between myself and the Easter lunch disaster, my heartbeat finally slowed to a steady rhythm. The silence in my car was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of secrets I had carried for 5 years. My family thought I was driving back to a cramped basement studio apartment in a rough part of the city. That was the address on my driver's license, a decoy mailbox I rented just to keep up appearances. I took the exit toward the downtown financial district, where the skyline gleamed like a row of steel teeth. I pulled my beat-up Honda into the underground garage of the Sovereign, the most exclusive residential high-rise in the state. The valet, a young man named Marcus, who knew better than to judge a book by its cover, nodded respectfully as I stepped out. "Good afternoon, Miss Vance," he said, taking my keys. "Shall I have the car detailed?" "No thank you, Marcus," I replied, smoothing out my hoodie. "I might need it to look rough for a while longer." I walked into the private elevator that required a retinal scan to access the penthouse floor. As the doors slid shut, enclosing me in quiet luxury, my phone buzzed with a series of notifications. I did not need to look to know what they were, but I checked anyway. The screen was a cascade of red alerts, a digital ledger of my family's dependency. For years I had listened to them call me a failure, while I quietly subsidized their entire existence. It started small. A grocery bill here, a utility payment there. But when my career as a forensic financial auditor took off, and I started making 7 figures cleaning up corporate messes, the dynamic shifted. I wanted to help them, but I knew their pride would never allow them to accept money from the daughter they looked down on. So I invented a lie. I told them that Dad had a forgotten investment account from the 80s that had finally matured. I called it the Theodore Vance Trust. I set up a shell company to administer it, and every month I funneled my own hard-earned money into their accounts under that name. I scrolled through the history on my phone as the elevator climbed. Transaction canceled. $4,500 for the mortgage on the house where I was just told I wasn't welcome at the table. Transaction canceled. $2,800 for private school tuition for Tasha's daughter, ensuring she would never have to attend a public school like I did. Transaction canceled. $1,200 for Mama Joyce's Neiman Marcus store credit card, paying off the hats she bought to impress her church friends. I had paid for the roof over their heads, the education of their children, and the clothes on their backs. And today, for the first time, the Bank of Zora was officially closed. I stepped into my penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere I had just left. I kicked off my sneakers and walked across the imported marble floors to the kitchen island. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and leaned against the counter, imagining the scene unfolding back at the house. By my calculations, the catering manager would be asking for the final payment right about now. It was a $3,000 bill for the lamb and the vintage champagne. Kyle, eager to show off in front of the Sterling partners, would pull out that black card with a flourish. He would hand it over without even looking, continuing his conversation about leverage and liquidity. I could see it clearly. The manager would insert the chip, the machine would pause, then a sharp beep declined. Kyle would laugh nervously, he would blame the machine. He would say something about fraud protection being too sensitive on high-limit accounts. He would tell them to run it again. Beep declined. At the same time, Tasha would be in the living room trying to salvage the vibe. She lived her life through the lens of her phone screen. She was likely trying to start a live stream to show her followers the exclusive investor meeting, hoping to secure brand deals for her lifestyle blog. She would tap the button to go live. But there would be no connection. I had just severed the family data plan. For a woman like Tasha, losing internet access was like losing oxygen. She would be staring at a spinning wheel, panic rising in her chest as her digital validation evaporated. I took a sip of water, the bubbles sharp against my tongue. It felt cold to think this way, but warmth had gotten me nothing but disrespect. My phone rang, shattering the peace of my apartment. The screen lit up with a photo of Mama Joyce. I let it ring twice before picking up. I did not say hello. Zora. Her voice was not just loud, it was hysterical. It was a pitch I had not heard since I was a teenager. Zora. What did you do? I kept my voice calm, professional. I did what you asked, Mother. I left. Don't play games with me, she screamed. The power just went out. The music stopped. The air conditioning is off. We are sitting in the dark with the Sterling partners. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights that were just starting to flicker on in the twilight. That sounds unfortunate, I said. But I am not sure why you are calling me. I am just a freelancer, remember? I don't have any money to help you with your bills. You pay the electric bill through your father's trust, she yelled. Fix it, Zora. Kyle is trying to explain to the investors why the lights went out in the middle of a pitch. This is humiliating. I paused, letting the silence stretch until I could hear her breathing raggedly on the other end. Mom, I said softly, there is no trust. There never was. I hung up the phone before she could respond. I stared at the screen for a second, then powered it down completely. I had told them the truth, but I knew they wouldn't believe it. Not yet. They would think I was being cruel. They would think I was lashing out. But they had no idea that the darkness in their dining room was the least of their problems. The real storm was just beginning, and I was the only one with an umbrella. I walked over to my laptop and opened it. It was time to look at that loan application again. If Kyle thought a declined credit card was bad, he was not ready for what a forensic audit would uncover. My phone started buzzing again immediately. I watched it vibrate across the marble countertop. Mama Joyce was not the type of woman to accept a dial tone. She viewed hanging up as an act of war. I picked it up on the fourth ring, ready for the storm. "Do not you dare hang up on me again, Zora." Her voice was shrill, echoing slightly, as if she was pacing in an empty hallway. "I am standing here in the dark with potential investors holding cell phone flashlights to see their appetizers. You need to fix this glitch immediately. Call the bank or call your father, but get the lights back on." "It is not a glitch, Mom," I said, leaning back in my leather office chair and spinning slowly to face the window. "You told me to stop relying on the family. You were very specific at lunch. You said if I could not contribute to the family's success, I should leave. So I did. And I took my contributions with me." "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "You contribute nothing but embarrassment to this family. I contribute $4,000 a month for your mortgage," I said, keeping my voice flat and factual. "I contribute $800 for the electric bill that keeps your crystal chandeliers burning. I pay for the family cellular plan that Tasha is currently panicking over because she cannot check her Instagram likes. It was all on my auto-pay, Mom, and now it is all cancelled." There was a pause on the line. For a second, I thought the gravity of the situation had finally sunk in. But then I heard a scoff. It was a harsh, brittle sound. "You are delusional." Mama Joyce laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think because you run a few errands for your father that you pay the bills. Your father pays those bills. The Theodore Vance Trust pays those bills. You are just the delivery girl, Zora. Do not confuse the messenger with the king. There is no trust, Mom." I repeated, closing my eyes. "I have told you this before, but you never listen. Dad has not made a dime since 1998. I have been funding that account for 5 years. Every vacation you took, every dress you bought. It came from my earnings." "Liar," she hissed. "You are a jealous, ungrateful liar. You see us succeeding. You see Kyle building an empire. And you want to steal the spotlight. You are sick, Zora. You are abandoning us in a crisis and making up stories to feel important. I cannot believe I raised a daughter who would kick her own family when they are down. Your father simply forgot to transfer the funds. That is all this is. And you are taking advantage of his mistake to torture us." I heard a scuffle on the other end. The phone was snatched away. Then Kyle's voice boomed through the speaker. He sounded out of breath and furious. "Give me the phone, Joyce," he barked. "Zora, listen to me. I do not know what kind of sick prank you are pulling, but you are going to regret it. I am going to sue the electric company for damages. And I am going to sue you for emotional distress if you do not stop this nonsense." "Go ahead, Kyle," I said. "Check the billing address on the utility account. Check the name on the credit card that just got declined at the catering van. It is all me. I do not have time for your little games." Kyle interrupted, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We know you did not pay for anything. You are broke, Zora. You drive a Honda. You live in a basement. You are just trying to sabotage me because I am successful and you are nobody. Just wait until my lawyers get hold of the power company. They will be begging to turn the lights back on. And as for you, Zora, do not bother coming back. We are done with you." He hung up. The line went dead. I looked at the phone in my hand and let out a long breath. They were in total denial. Even in the dark, they refused to see the light. Kyle was going to call his lawyer to sue the power company. That was perfect. Because when his lawyer looked into the account history, he would find my name on every single statement. But Kyle had made a mistake. He threatened to involve lawyers. He did not know that I had already engaged the most ruthless legal team in the city. And while he was worrying about the lights, I was staring at the evidence of identity theft on my laptop screen. He thought the worst thing that happened today was a power outage. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the one person who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried. I set the phone down and pulled up the contact for my attorney. It was time to stop being the daughter and start being the auditor. If they wanted to talk about law, we would talk about law. But the conversation was not going to be about a utility bill. It was going to be about fraud. 3 days later, the silence from my family broke, but not because they wanted to apologize. It broke because the reality of their financial house of cards finally collapsed. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing a forensic audit for a tech merger when my phone pinged with a notification from my bank. It was not a transaction alert. It was a fraud prevention update. Someone was trying to run a card that no longer existed. I pulled up the GPS location of the transaction attempted. The Serenity Heights Spa, of course. While I was building a case against them for identity theft, my sister Tasha was getting a $500 gold leaf facial. She clearly thought the power outage at Easter was just a fluke, a momentary blip that would resolve itself once Dad moved some money around. She did not understand that the money she thought was Dad's had actually been mine. I leaned back in my chair and imagined the scene. Tasha would be standing at the marble reception desk, glowing from her treatment, probably wearing one of her signature silk rompers. She would hand over the Platinum American Express card with that dismissive wave of hers, not even looking at the receptionist. The receptionist, let us call her Chloe, would smile politely and insert the chip. Then the silence would stretch a little too long. The machine would buzz. "I am sorry, Miss Vance," Chloe would say. "This card has been declined." Tasha would laugh. It would be that high-pitched, nervous laugh she used when she was lying. "Do not be silly. Run it again. The chip is probably dusty." So Chloe would run it again. Declined. I could see Tasha digging through her Louis Vuitton bag, her frustration mounting. She would pull out the Visa. Declined. Then the MasterCard. Declined. What Tasha did not know was that for the last decade, her pristine credit score of 780 was entirely artificial. She was an authorized user on my accounts. I had added her years ago when she was in college to help her build credit. Because my history was flawless, her score was inflated. But the moment I removed her from my accounts 3 days ago, her credit profile was stripped naked. Without my history anchoring her, she was just a woman with a mountain of personal debt and zero assets. Her score had likely plummeted to subprime levels overnight. To the banking algorithms, she was no longer Tasha the influencer, she was Tasha the liability. The notification on my screen updated again. Merchant alert. Police notified by vendor. I raised an eyebrow. Tasha must have caused a scene. According to the police scanner app I monitored for local news, a disturbance was reported at the spa. A woman was refusing to pay and accusing the staff of theft. That sounded exactly like Tasha. She would never admit she was broke. She would accuse the machine of being broken or the staff of trying to scam her. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was not Tasha. It was Kyle. I let it go to voicemail, but I watched the transcript appear in real time on my screen. "Zora, pick up the phone right now. Tasha is being held hostage by some incompetent spa manager who thinks we cannot pay a measly $500 bill. Come down here and fix this. Bring cash." I did not move. I did not rush to save her. I sipped my coffee. 20 minutes later, a new transaction attempt appeared on my fraud monitor. Same location. Serenity Heights Spa. But this time the card attempted was the corporate card for Kyle's investment firm. I watched the screen waiting for the result. Transaction declined. Reason: account frozen for suspicious activity. I smiled. Kyle had driven all the way to the spa to play the hero. He had probably stormed in demanding to speak to the manager, threatening to buy the building and fire everyone. He would have pulled out his heavy metal corporate card, the ultimate symbol of his supposed status. But he forgot one thing. When I reported the identity theft regarding the loan application 3 days ago, the bank automatically flagged all associated accounts for review. Since Kyle was the co-signer on the fraudulent loan, his business accounts were temporarily frozen pending investigation. The hero had arrived, but his sword was made of glass. I could only imagine the look on his face when the receptionist handed the card back to him. The man who bragged about managing millions could not even buy his wife's freedom from a day spa. My phone rang again. This time it was Tasha. I answered. Zora, she was sobbing, but it was not a sad cry. It was an angry, humiliated shriek. They are going to arrest me. The manager called the police. Kyle is here, but his card is not working. He says it is a banking error, but they do not believe him. You have to come. You have to pay them. I spoke calmly. Tasha, I am confused. Why would I come? You told me at Easter that I was an embarrassment. You said I needed to stop relying on the family. If I come down there and pay your bill, would I not be interfering with your independence? Zora, please, she screamed. Everyone is looking at me. They are treating me like a criminal. That is because theft of services is a crime, Tasha, I said. And judging by the fraud alerts I am seeing, it is not the only crime this family has committed recently. What are you talking about? She snapped. Just bring the money. I cannot, I said. I canceled the family support fund. Remember, I am just a broke freelancer. I do not have $500 to spare for a facial. Maybe you should ask Kyle to sell his watch. I hung up just as I heard the distinct sound of a police siren in the background of her call. I turned back to my computer. The spa incident was just the beginning. If Tasha's credit score had tanked this hard, the interest rates on her adjustable rate mortgage were about to skyrocket. And the lease on that G-Wagon, that was next. The dominoes were falling, and I did not even have to push them. I just had to step out of the way and let gravity do its work. 2 hours later, the War Council had convened at my parents' house. I knew this not because I was invited, but because the neighborhood group chat, which I was still quietly a part of, was lighting up with updates. Apparently, Tasha had arrived in a taxi sobbing loud enough to be heard 3 houses down. Kyle followed shortly after leaving his luxury sedan at the spa because he could not pay the valet fee to retrieve it without his corporate card. They were gathered in the living room, likely drinking my father's expensive scotch and plotting their revenge against me. I could picture it perfectly. Mama Joyce would be sitting in her high-backed floral armchair fanning herself with a piece of mail and declaring that I was possessed by a demon of selfishness. Tasha would be reapplying her mascara, crying about how I ruined her skin at the spa. And Kyle would be pacing the floor, talking about lawsuits and injunctions. But their strategy session was interrupted by a sound that does not belong in a gated community. It was the low, grumbling roar of a heavy-duty diesel engine. It was not the purr of a Mercedes or the hum of a Tesla. It was the sound of consequences arriving on 6 wheels. A massive flatbed tow truck backed into the driveway. The beep, beep, beep of its reverse gear echoed through the cul-de-sac, shattering the afternoon quiet. According to Mrs. Higgins, who lives across the street and was watching through her blinds, Tasha sprinted out the front door barefoot. She was screaming at the driver, waving her arms like she was trying to land a plane. "Stop! What are you doing? Get away from my car!" she shrieked, running toward her beloved G-Wagon. The driver, a large man who looked like he had heard every excuse in the book, did not even look up from his clipboard. He walked around the matte black SUV, checking the VIN number against his paperwork. "Mom, please step away from the vehicle," he said, his voice bored and flat. "I have a repossession order for this vehicle due to default on the lease agreement." "Default?" Tasha screamed, her voice cracking. "That is impossible. My husband pays the lease. It is a $3,000 a month car. Do you know who we are?" Kyle came stumbling out of the house, then looking flushed and panicked. He tried to pull his usual power move, puffing out his chest and walking up to the driver. "Now listen here, buddy. There must be a mistake," Kyle said, trying to sound authoritative, but failing miserably. "My accountant handles all these bills. Just unhook the car and I will make a call to clear this up." The driver finally looked at him. He pulled a printed sheet from his clipboard and held it up. "There is no mistake," he said. "The primary payer on this account is Azora Vance. The auto pay was canceled 3 days ago. When we attempted to charge the secondary card on file, it came back as insufficient funds. And since the credit score associated with this lease just dropped by 200 points, the bank exercised their right to immediate recall. Tasha froze. She looked at Kyle. Then she looked at the house where Mama Joyce was standing in the doorway, clutching her pearls. "Zora pays for my car," she whispered. She genuinely did not know. For 3 years I had transferred $1,500 every month to the leasing company. I had told them it was a gift from Auntie Zora, a little bonus from my freelance work. Tasha had just accepted it, never asking how a freelancer could afford such a gift, never questioning why she never saw a bill. She just drove the car and took the selfies. The driver did not wait for her to process her new reality. He engaged the hydraulic lift. The back of the truck tilted down and he began hooking the chains to the undercarriage of the G-Wagon. "No, wait." Tasha lunged forward, grabbing the door handle of the car as if she could physically hold it back. "You cannot take it. It is my brand. I need it for my image. Mom, if you do not let go, I will call the sheriff," the driver warned, reaching for his radio. That was when the real show began. The noise had attracted an audience. The neighbors were coming out of their houses. These were not just any neighbors. These were the women of Mama Joyce's church group, the deaconess board, the choir director, women who wore white gloves on Sundays and judged everyone else the rest of the week. Mrs. Higgins was standing on her porch holding her phone up, recording the whole thing. Mr. Johnson was washing his car 2 doors down, shaking his head. Mama Joyce saw them. She saw the phones pointed at her driveway. She saw the tow truck dragging the symbol of her family's success up the ramp. She saw her golden child Tasha barefoot and screaming like a banshee, while her son-in-law Kyle stood uselessly to the side. For a woman like Mama Joyce, who valued reputation above oxygen, this was worse than death. It was scandal. "Make it stop, Kyle," she hissed from the doorway, her voice trembling with rage. "Pay the man. Do something. Everyone is watching." Kyle patted his pockets, looking for a wallet that held nothing but frozen plastic. "I cannot, Joyce," he muttered, looking down at his expensive loafers. Zora locked everything. As the truck engine revved and the G-Wagon was secured on the flatbed, Tasha collapsed onto the paved driveway, sobbing into her hands. The truck pulled away, carrying her status symbol down the street, past the manicured lawns and the staring neighbors. Mama Joyce did not go to comfort her daughter. She looked at the neighbors recording the scene, then she looked at Tasha with pure disgust. She turned around and slammed the front door shut, leaving her favorite child weeping on the concrete. I watched the video Mrs. Higgins sent me 5 minutes later. I took a sip of my wine. They were finally learning the most expensive lesson of their lives. You cannot drive a Mercedes on a Honda budget, especially when the Honda driver finally decides to take the keys back. But the car was just metal and rubber. What was coming next would take something much more valuable than their transportation. It would take their freedom. The next morning I received a notification from my security system, but it was not from the penthouse. It was from the doorbell camera of the basement apartment I rented on the other side of town. I pulled up the feed on my tablet. There stood Mama Joyce. She looked completely out of place in that neighborhood, standing on the cracked concrete porch in her designer trench coat, clutching her pearls as if she might catch a disease from the peeling paint on the doorframe. She knocked aggressively. When no one answered, she peered through the dirty window, trying to catch a glimpse of the poverty she assumed I lived in. I watched her pull out her phone, and a second later mine rang. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I put it on speaker and set it down on my mahogany desk next to my morning espresso. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice crisp and efficient. "Zora." "Where are you, Mama?" Joyce demanded, her voice tight with irritation. "I am standing outside your apartment. I brought you some leftovers from yesterday. I thought since you are struggling so much you might appreciate a home-cooked meal." I took a sip of my coffee. The manipulation was textbook. First, she insults my stability. Then she offers a crumb of charity to make herself feel benevolent. She did not care if I was hungry. She wanted to gain entry. She wanted to inspect my life so she could criticize it. I am not home, I said simply. Well, where are you? She asked, looking around the street nervously as a beat-up truck drove by with its muffler dragging. This neighborhood is dangerous, Zora. A woman of your background should not be living here. It reflects poorly on us. I am working, Mother, I said. But you did not drive all the way down to East Oak Street just to deliver lamb chops. What do you want? There was a pause. On the video feed, I saw her straighten her posture, as if she was preparing a sermon. I know you are angry, Zora. She began, her tone shifting to that sickeningly sweet register she used when she wanted something. I know you felt hurt yesterday, but what you did to Tasha was cruel. To have her car taken away in front of the neighbors, to have Mrs. Higgins filming it. It was vindictive. I did not take her car away, I corrected her. The bank took her car away because she could not pay for it. Because you stopped paying for it, she snapped, dropping the sweet act. You set her up, Zora. You knew she could not afford that lease on her own. You gave her that car as a gift, and then you snatched it back just to humiliate her. That is not what family does. The Bible says we must bear one another's burdens. God calls us to forgive and to be generous. I almost laughed. Mama Joyce only quoted scripture when it benefited her wallet. The Bible also says that if a man will not work, he shall not eat, I replied. Tasha is 35 years old. She has a husband. If they cannot afford a G-Wagon, perhaps they should drive a Toyota. How dare you, she hissed. Your sister is an influencer. Her image is her livelihood. You have ruined her reputation. But I am willing to fix this. I am willing to be the bigger person. I waited. I knew the pitch was coming. If you transfer the money to get the car back, she said, rushing the words out, and reinstate the family data plan so she can issue a statement to her followers, I will convince your father to let you come back for Sunday dinner next week. We will not even mention this ugly incident. We will forgive you, Zora. We will forgive you. The audacity was breathtaking. She was offering me a seat at a table where I was disrespected as a reward for paying thousands of dollars to restore their vanity. I leaned forward, looking at the video feed, where she was still waiting expectantly. Mother, you seem to be confused, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I am not looking for forgiveness because I have done nothing wrong, and I am certainly not looking for an invitation to dinner. I stopped the payments because I am done enabling you. I am done engaging in the fantasy that you are wealthy, while I am the charity case. Zora, please, she said, desperation creeping in. Tasha is falling apart. She cannot leave the house. Then tell her to read a book, I said. Listen, I have to go. I have a video conference with a client in London in 2 minutes. London, she scoffed. Since when do you have clients in London? Since I became one of the top forensic auditors in the country, I said. Goodbye, Mother. Please get off my porch before the neighbors call the police. They are very suspicious of strangers in trench coats. I hung up before she could respond. On the screen, I saw her mouth fall open. She stared at the phone, then at the door, then stormed back to her leased Lexus. I closed the camera feed and turned my attention to the other monitor on my desk. While Mama Joyce was trying to gaslight me about Christian charity, I had been running a deep dive into Kyle's business accounts. I had expected to find mismanagement. I had expected to find debt. But as I scrolled through the transaction history of his investment firm, my blood ran cold. The screen was filled with transfers. Not investments, not stock purchases, but transfers to personal accounts, offshore accounts, and most distinctively, a series of large cash withdrawals structured just under the $10,000 reporting limit. But that was not the worst part. I pulled up a document from the folder labeled Client Agreements. It was a digital copy of a loan guarantee. It was dated 3 months ago. And there at the bottom, next to Kyle's sloppy signature, was a signature that looked exactly like mine. He had not just tried to take out a loan in my name yesterday. He had been using my name and my credit profile to guarantee his risky trades for months. I sat back in my chair. The anger that had been simmering in my gut turned into something colder. Something more dangerous. This was not just a family dispute anymore. Mama Joyce wanted to talk about what the Bible said. Well, she should have read the part about thou shalt not steal. I picked up my phone again, but this time I did not call my mother. I called my lawyer. I want you to expedite the forensic report, I told him, my eyes fixed on the forged signature. And get the FBI on the line. We are not just looking at debt anymore. We are looking at a Ponzi scheme. And I am the primary victim. The difference between a lie and a crime is often just a matter of paperwork. For the next 6 hours, I ceased to be Zora the daughter and fully embraced Zora the forensic auditor. My penthouse office became a war room. 3 monitors hummed with activity, casting a cool blue light over the room as I dissected the financial entrails of Kyle's investment firm. Kyle liked to present himself as a visionary. He threw around terms like high-yield arbitrage and decentralized asset management at family dinners to make my parents nod in confused admiration. But looking at his raw bank statements, the story was much simpler and far more ugly. There was no arbitrage, there were no assets. I traced the flow of money with the precision of a surgeon. It was a classic clumsy Ponzi scheme. He was taking money from new investors, friends from the country club members of Mama Joyce's church, and using it to pay dividends to older investors to keep them quiet. The rest he was funneling into his own lifestyle. The lease on the G-Wagon, the dinners at 5-star steakhouses, the bespoke suits. He was eating the seed corn. But then I saw a transfer that made my stomach drop. 2 days ago, just before the Easter lunch, a deposit of $50,000 had hit Kyle's operating account. The source was labeled simply TV retirement. Theodore Vance. My father. My hand hovered over the mouse. Dad had worked 40 years at the post office to build that nest egg. He was terrified of the stock market. He kept his money in low-risk bonds. Mama Joyce must have convinced him to hand it over to Kyle. She probably told him Kyle would double it in a month. Instead, Kyle had used it to pay off a gambling debt to a shell company in Nevada. The money was gone. If I told Dad now, the shock might kill him. And if I told Mama Joyce, she would accuse me of lying to sabotage Kyle. I needed more than digital trails. I needed physical proof. I needed to catch him in the act of burying the body. I picked up my burner phone, the one I used for sensitive cases, and dialed a number I had not used in a year. "It is me," I said when the line connected. "I need eyes on a target, high priority. I need to know who he meets, where he goes, and I need high-resolution photos of any documents that change hands." The voice on the other end asked for a name and a location. I gave them Kyle's details. I spent the next day in a state of controlled fury. I went through the motions of my own work, reviewing legitimate ledgers for legitimate clients, but my mind was constantly on the trap I was setting. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be the detective. By late afternoon, the email finally arrived. Subject line: surveillance update. Subject: KV. I opened the attachment. The photos were grainy but clear enough. They showed Kyle standing in the parking lot of a regional bank downtown. He looked nervous. He was sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, looking over his shoulder. He was not alone. Standing next to him was a woman I did not recognize. She was young, dressed in a sharp business suit, but she did not look like a banker. She looked like a fixer. They were arguing. Kyle was gesturing wildly, pleading. The woman looked unimpressed. I clicked to the next photo. Kyle was handing her a thick manila envelope. I clicked again. The woman had opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. She was holding them up to the sunlight, inspecting them. I zoomed in. The camera my private investigator used was military grade. I could see the letterhead. It was a loan application for a second mortgage on my parents' house. My heart hammered against my ribs. Dad had paid off that house 5 years ago. It was his only unencumbered asset. Kyle was trying to leverage it. I zoomed in further to the signature line at the bottom of the page. The woman's thumb was partially covering it, but I could see the distinct loops of the handwriting. It was not my father's shaky cursive, and it was not my mother's tight, angular script. It was my name. Zora Vance. I stared at the screen, confused. Why would my name be on a mortgage application for a house I did not own? Then it hit me. The deed. Years ago, when Dad had a health scare, he had quietly added my name to the deed of the house for estate planning purposes to avoid probate court if he passed. He had trusted me to protect the asset. Kyle must have found the paperwork in Dad's office. He wasn't just forging my signature to get a loan for himself. He was using my credit and my partial ownership of the house to steal my parents' home right out from under them. And this woman in the parking lot was the notary, or the loan officer he had bribed to push it through without me being present. I looked at the woman's face in the photo again. She was smiling now, tucking the forged document into her briefcase. She had just accepted a fake signature to facilitate a massive fraud. I saved the photos to 3 different hard drives. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt the cold, hard resolve of an executioner. Kyle had just made a fatal error. He thought he was just stealing money. He did not realize he had just handed me the murder weapon. I picked up my phone to call my lawyer, but this time I wasn't going to ask for a cease and desist. I was going to ask for a warrant. I stared at the pixelated image on my screen until my eyes burned. The woman standing next to Kyle in the bank parking lot was wearing a wig. It was a cheap synthetic bob cut that was clearly meant to mimic my natural hair texture. She was wearing oversized, thick-rimmed glasses that I had not worn since my sophomore year of college. It was a caricature of me. It was a costume. But under the disguise, the posture was unmistakable. The way she held her designer handbag, the way she tilted her chin up even when she was looking at a document. It was Tasha, my sister. The woman who had publicly humiliated me at Easter lunch for wearing a hoodie was now dressing up as me to commit a felony. I felt a physical blow to my chest. It was not heartbreak. It was shock at the sheer audacity of it. Tasha and Kyle were not just greedy, they were stupid. They had walked into a bank in broad daylight and forged my signature on federal loan documents. I clicked through the rest of the photos my investigator had sent. There was a close-up of the document Tasha was signing. It was a second mortgage application for our parents' house. They were taking out $200,000 against the equity. Dad had worked for 40 years to pay off that house. It was his safety net. And because my name was on the deed for estate planning purposes, they needed me to sign off on it. Instead of asking me, they decided to become me. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city skyline. My reflections stared back at me. For years I had allowed them to treat me like a doormat. I had paid their bills and accepted their insults because I thought that was the price of having a family. I thought if I was just generous enough, they would eventually love me. But this was not about love or lack of it. This was criminal. Identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. I started listing the charges in my head, ticking them off like items on a grocery list. In the state of New York, these were not just misdemeanors. These were felonies with mandatory minimum sentences. If convicted, Tasha would not be worried about her Instagram following. She would be worried about surviving in a federal correctional facility. And Kyle, the man who prided himself on his financial acumen, would be barred from ever trading a stock or managing a dollar again. The last shred of empathy I held for them evaporated. I had been planning to teach them a lesson about financial independence. I had been planning to let them struggle for a few months until they apologized. I was going to let the power get cut off and let the cars get repossessed just to humble them. But you cannot humble a predator. You have to cage them. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They were willing to destroy my credit, my reputation, and my financial future, just to maintain their facade of wealth. They viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be harvested, a pig to be slaughtered so they could feast. I went back to my desk and sat down. My movements were slow and deliberate. I opened a secure drive on my computer and dragged the photos into a new folder. I named the folder Operation Family Takedown. Then I picked up my phone. I scrolled past my father's contact. I scrolled past my mother's contact. I stopped at a name that struck fear into the hearts of CEOs and corrupt politicians across the city. Marcus Thorne. He was not a family law attorney. He was not a mediator. Marcus was a shark in a three-piece suit. He was the lawyer you called when you wanted to burn a village to the ground and salt the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. His voice was smooth, deep, and dangerous. Zora, to what do I owe the pleasure? We usually only speak when a Fortune 500 company is about to implode. I looked at the photo of Tasha one last time. I looked at the fake glasses and the smug expression on Kyle's face as he watched her sign my name. Marcus. I am sending you a secure file. I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It contains evidence of a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme and aggravated identity theft. The perpetrators are Kyle Vance and Tasha Vance. There was a brief silence on the other end. Marcus was good. He did not ask if I was sure. He did not ask if I wanted to reconsider because they were blood. He knew me too well. I received the file, Zora, he said, the sound of typing clicking in the background. I am looking at it now. This is substantial. We can file a civil suit for damages immediately. We can freeze their assets before the banks even open tomorrow. We can get you a settlement that will bankrupt them for 3 lifetimes. No, Marcus. I interrupted him. I swiveled my chair around to face the city lights again. Somewhere out there, Tasha was probably celebrating her new loan. She was probably toasting to her cleverness, thinking she had pulled one over on her dumb little sister. I do not want a settlement, I said. I do not want their money. I do not want an apology. Then what do you want, Zora? Marcus asked. I took a deep breath. I want you to prepare a criminal referral package for the FBI. I want you to call the district attorney. I want you to use every connection you have to ensure this goes to trial. I paused, letting the weight of my next words hang in the air. I want them in prison, Marcus. I want to watch them be handcuffed. I want to see the look on their faces when they realize that the sister they called a failure is the one locking the cell door. Destroy them. 2 days later, it was Mama Joyce's 60th birthday party. Even from the street, the desperation was palpable. They had rented a tent for the backyard and hired a string quartet, but I knew the catering staff demanded cash up front. I knew because I had seen the withdrawal from Kyle's personal account, the one funded by a high-interest loan from a devastatingly dangerous lender in the city. They were throwing a party on money that came with broken kneecaps, if not repaid in 30 days. I parked my car, not the Honda this time, but a black sedan provided by my firm. I was not alone. Sitting next to me was Mr. Henderson, a bank-appointed property appraiser. He was a man of few words, clutching a laser measuring device and a clipboard that contained the death warrant for my parents' social status. We walked up the driveway past the valet stand where Tasha was loudly instructing the attendant to be careful with her friend's leased Porsche. When she saw me, she froze. She looked at my suit, which was sharp-tailored and intimidating. Then she looked at Mr. Henderson. You are not invited, Zora. Tasha hissed, stepping in front of us. This is a celebration for people who actually love this family. Not for traitors who call the police on their sisters. I stepped around her without slowing down. I am not here for the cake, Tasha. We entered the backyard through the side gate. The party was in full swing. Mama Joyce was holding court in the center of the white tent, wearing a sequined gold gown that was far too tight. She was laughing loudly at a joke made by the pastor, oblivious to the fact that her world was ending. Kyle stood near the bar downing his third martini, his eyes darting around nervously. When I stepped onto the grass, the music seemed to falter. Guests turned to look. I was the ghost at the feast. Mama Joyce saw me. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl that etched deep lines into her heavy makeup. She excused herself from her friends and marched over her sequins, rattling with every step. I told you that you were not welcome until you apologized, she said loud enough for half the party to hear. Who is this man, Zora? Did you bring a date to a party you were not invited to? How tacky. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. I am not a date, ma'am. I am an independent appraiser sent by Citigroup. Mama Joyce laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. An appraiser? We are not selling the house. Why would the bank send an appraiser? I stepped forward. Because the house is in default, mother. The chatter in the tent died down. Kyle dropped his glass. It shattered on the patio stones, but no one moved to clean it up. What are you talking about, Mama? Joyce whispered, looking around at her guests. We paid off this house 5 years ago. Your father worked 40 years to clear this mortgage. Yes, he did, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the silent audience. But 3 months ago, a new mortgage was taken out on this property, a loan for $200,000. The documents claimed the money was for home renovations. But we both know there are no renovations. I pointed at Kyle, who was now backing away slowly toward the exit. Kyle and Tasha forged Dad's signature to authorize the loan, I continued. And since my name is on the deed for estate planning purposes, they forged my signature too. They took the money and they spent it. But they forgot to make the payments. Liar, Tasha shrieked from behind me. She is lying, Mom. She is just jealous because Kyle is an investor and she is a nobody. I ignored her. I looked directly at Mama Joyce. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings, Mother. Mr. Henderson is here to assess the value of the property before they seize it. You do not own this home anymore. The bank does. And technically, since the loan was fraudulent, the FBI considers it a crime scene. Mama Joyce stared at me. Her chest was heaving. Her eyes were wide, not with realization, but with a terrifying refusal to accept reality. She looked at her friends who were whispering behind their hands. She looked at the expensive tent. She looked at Kyle, who was shaking his head frantically. She chose the lie. She raised her hand and swung it with all her strength. The slap cracked through the silence like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned, but I did not flinch. I slowly turned my face back to look at her. You speak lies from the devil, she screamed, spitting the words at me. Kyle is a millionaire. He manages assets you could never dream of. He takes care of this family. You are the thief, Zora. You are the one trying to steal our joy. Get out of my house. I tasted blood inside my mouth. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I saw the fear behind her eyes. She knew. Deep down she knew. But she would rather hit me than face the truth that her golden son-in-law had bankrupted her. I signaled to Mr. Henderson. He looked uncomfortable, but he began taking photos of the house exterior. I will go, Mother, I said, my voice deadly calm. But I am not the one you need to be worried about. I pointed toward the driveway where a black SUV with tinted windows had just pulled up, blocking the exit. 3 men in dark suits were stepping out. They did not look like bankers, and they certainly did not look like police. Kyle saw them too. His face went gray. I think Kyle's real investors have arrived, I said, wiping the blood from my lip. And unlike the bank, they do not send letters before they collect. Happy birthday, Mother. I hope it was worth it. The slap still stung my cheek, but the pain was distant. It felt like it was happening to someone else. I stood my ground while the party guests stared in horrified silence. The string quartet had stopped playing, leaving only the sound of the wind rattling the expensive white tent. I reached into my leather portfolio. I did not rush. I pulled out a document stamped in bold red ink. It was not a birthday card. I held it out to my mother. Her hand was trembling so violently that her gold bracelets clattered together like wind chimes. Read it. Mother, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. It is a notice of default pursuant to a foreclosure action. She stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. She did not want to take it, but she had no choice. She snatched it from my hand and her eyes darted across the legal jargon. I watched her face crumble. The arrogance, the pride, the carefully constructed mask of the wealthy matriarch, it all dissolved in seconds. It says we owe $212,000, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It says the auction date is set for next Tuesday. She looked up at me, tears cutting tracks through her foundation. Zora, what is this? We do not have a mortgage. I turned my gaze to Kyle. He was sweating now, profusely. He had loosened his tie and was looking for an escape route, but the garden was enclosed by hedges, and the only exit was blocked by the men in the SUV. "Tell her, Kyle," I said. "Tell her about the power of attorney document you had her and Dad sign 3 months ago. You told them it was a standard form for tax optimization, did you not? You told them it would protect their assets." Kyle laughed nervously, wiping his forehead with a cocktail napkin. "Zora, you are being dramatic. This is just a bridge loan. I am restructuring some capital for the firm. It is standard leverage. It is theft." "Kyle," I interrupted him. "You used that power of attorney to take out a second mortgage on this house. You cashed out every penny of equity my father spent 40 years building. And you did not invest it. You spent it." Mama Joyce turned slowly to face her son-in-law. The man she had bragged about at church. The man she had chosen over her own daughter. "Kyle," she said, her voice rising to a shriek. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me my house is safe." Kyle backed away, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Joyce, listen to me. The market took a dip. I just need a few days to move some funds around. The house is fine. I am going to pay it off next week. I have a deal closing in Singapore. It is huge." He was lying. I knew his accounts were empty. I knew his Singapore deal was a fantasy. And I knew that he had missed not one, not two, but 4 consecutive payments on this loan. "You do not have a deal, Kyle," I said, stepping closer to him. "I audited your books. You are insolvent. You have been paying the interest on this loan with credit cards that are now maxed out. And when the bank threatened to call the note due, you forged my signature on a guarantee because you needed a co-signer with assets." Tasha, who had been silent until now, rushed to her husband's side. She grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with panic. "Kyle, what is she talking about? You said we were rich. You bought me the Porsche." "The Porsche is leased, Tasha," I said. "And the lease is in default, just like this house. You are throwing a party in a backyard you do not own, drinking champagne you cannot afford, wearing clothes that are about to be repossessed." Mama Joyce let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She crumpled to the ground, dropping the foreclosure notice on the grass. The guests began to scatter, grabbing their purses and whispering frantically. No one wanted to be part of a scandal. But Kyle was not looking at his crying mother-in-law or his panicked wife. He was looking past me toward the driveway. The 3 men in suits had entered the garden. They moved with the heavy, purposeful gait of predators who smell blood. They were not smiling. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a scar running through his eyebrow, stopped right in front of the punch bowl. "Kyle Vance," he said, his voice like gravel. Kyle squeaked. He literally squeaked like a mouse. "Yes, that is me. Yes, that is." The man did not blink. "Mr. Moretti sends his regards. He says the 30 days are up. He says he does not care about restructuring. He wants his principal, plus the VIG. Now." Mama Joyce looked up from the grass, her eyes wide with terror. "Who are these people, Kyle? They are not bankers, Mother," I said, stepping back to give them space. "They are the reason Kyle needed that loan so badly. He owes money to people who do not file lawsuits. They break legs." Kyle fell to his knees, his expensive suit staining on the grass. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "I just need a little more time. My sister-in-law is here. She is wealthy. She can write you a check. Zora, please help me." He pointed a shaking finger at me. The man with the scar turned his dead eyes in my direction. I smoothed my blazer and looked at the thug. I did not flinch. "I am not his sister-in-law," I said coldly. "I am the auditor who just sent his file to the FBI. His debts are his own. And gentlemen, if I were you, I would get in line. The federal government tends to seize assets first." The thug looked back at Kyle and smiled a cruel, humorless smile. "We do not need assets," he said, reaching inside his jacket. "We take payment in other ways." As the guests screamed and Mama Joyce fainted dead away, I checked my watch. The police would be here in 3 minutes. But for Kyle, those 3 minutes were going to feel like a lifetime. The man with the scar did not wait for an answer. He picked up a heavy crystal vase from the gift table, an antique piece Mama Joyce had been bragging about for weeks, and smashed it onto the patio stones. The sound was like a gunshot, sharp and violent. It shattered the paralysis of the remaining guests. The string quartet scrambled to pack their instruments, abandoning dignity for safety as they fled through the side gate. The few friends Mama Joyce had managed to keep sat frozen in their chairs or scrambled under tables as the thugs began overturning the buffet, sending trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres crashing into the grass. Kyle, the man who had stood at the head of the table on Easter Sunday and lectured me about leadership, did something unforgivable. As the thug took a threatening step forward, reaching inside his jacket, Kyle did not step up to protect his family. He stepped back. He grabbed Mama Joyce by her sequined shoulders, not to steady her, but to pull her in front of him. He used his 60-year-old mother-in-law as a human shield against a mob enforcer. Then, realizing she was too short to cover him completely, he released her and ducked behind Tasha, crouching low and peering out from behind the silk of her dress like a frightened child. "Don't hurt me," Kyle whimpered, his voice high and pathetic. "She has money. My mother-in-law has money. Take her jewelry, take the house. Just don't hurt me." Mama Joyce stood there, swaying in her heels, staring at the man she had called a son, the man she had chosen over me. She looked at him, offering her up as a sacrifice to save his own skin, and for the first time in her life, she looked truly old. The betrayal was absolute. It stripped the paint right off the walls of her denial. The thug raised a heavy hand, perhaps to strike, perhaps just to terrorize. Tasha screamed, shielding her face. "That is enough." My voice was not loud. I did not shout. I spoke with the flat, bored intonation of someone reading a tax statute. But in the chaos of the garden, the tone was so out of place that it acted like a circuit breaker. I walked from the edge of the ruin to the center. I did not look at my trembling family. I kept my eyes locked on the man with the scar. I smoothed the lapel of my blazer and stood directly in his path. "You are operating out of the Gemini Shell Corporation in New Jersey, are you not?" I asked conversationally. "I recognize the collection method. It is sloppy, and it draws too much attention." The thug paused, his hand hovering in midair. He looked at me with confusion that quickly turned to suspicion. He looked at my suit, then at my face. "Who are you?" he growled. "I am the reason your previous employer, Mr. Russo, is currently serving 20 years in federal prison for structuring cash deposits to avoid IRS reporting requirements," I said, taking a step closer. "And if I remember correctly, your current operation routes funds through a car wash on 4th Street and a laundromat on Elm. You are layering the transactions through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, but you are lazy with the wire transfers. You are leaving a digital footprint a first-year auditor could trace in 5 minutes." The thug's eyes widened. He lowered his hand. He took a step back, instinctively checking his surroundings. He looked at me. Really looked at me, and I saw the moment of recognition hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from his face. "You are her," he whispered, the menace in his voice replaced by something akin to awe. "You are the auditor. I confirmed. And right now I have a direct line to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network on my phone. I can freeze every asset your boss has within 10 minutes. I can flag every account you use for payroll. Or you can walk away. You can give Mr. Vance 24 hours to settle his affairs legally, and we can pretend this aggressive little outburst never happened." The thug looked at Kyle, who was still cowering behind Tasha's skirt, weeping. Then he looked back at me. He knew the threat was real. He knew I wasn't bluffing, because in my world, information was more dangerous than a gun. He straightened his jacket. He signaled to his 2 associates, who stopped destroying the furniture immediately. "You have 24 hours, Vance," he spat at Kyle, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Because of her. But if the money isn't there by tomorrow night, even she can't save you." They turned and marched out of the garden, their SUV tires screeching as they sped away, leaving dust and silence in their wake. The silence that descended on the backyard was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. I turned around slowly. The yard was a wreck of broken glass and overturned tables. Mama Joyce was clutching her chest, looking at me as if I had just grown wings and breathed fire. Tasha was staring with her mouth hanging open, mascara running down her face. And Kyle looked terrified. Not of the thugs. He was terrified of me. "Who are you, Mama?" Joyce whispered, her voice trembling. "You are just a freelancer. You do data entry. You fix computers." I looked at them. The people who had mocked me, excluded me, and underestimated me for my entire life. They were looking at a stranger. "I tried to tell you," I said softly, "but you were too busy listening to him." I gestured to the coward shivering on the grass. "You have 24 hours, Kyle," I said. "I suggest you use them wisely. And Mom, you might want to ask your golden boy why he tried to trade your life for his." The dust from the black SUV had barely settled before the dynamic in the backyard shifted. The fear that had paralyzed my family evaporated the moment the immediate danger was gone, replaced instantly by a desperate, calculating hunger. Kyle stood up from the grass. He brushed the dirt off the knees of his ruined suit and straightened his tie. He did not go to check on Mama Joyce, who was being fanned by a waiter near the punch bowl. He did not check on his wife, whose mascara was running down her cheeks. He walked straight toward me. The look in his eyes had changed. 5 minutes ago, I was the enemy, the intruder, the failure. Now, after watching me stare down a mob enforcer, he looked at me like I was a resource to be mined. He saw my confidence, my knowledge of the criminal underworld, and most importantly, he assumed I had the liquidity to make his problem go away. "Zora," he said, putting on his best salesman smile. It was shaky, but it was there. That was incredible. Truly incredible. I had no idea you had those kinds of connections. You handled that situation like a pro. I watched him approach. The audacity was breathtaking. This was the man who had used my mother as a human shield. "It was not a connection, Kyle," I said coldly. "It was a warning. They will be back in 24 hours. And next time they won't stop at breaking a vase." I know, Kyle said, waving his hand dismissively, as if we were discussing a minor zoning issue. "But that gives us time, and that is all we need." "Look, Zora. I admit we have had our differences. I may have underestimated you. We all did. But family sticks together in a crisis, right?" Tasha wiped her eyes and nodded frantically, stepping up beside him. "Yes, Zora. We are family. You cannot let those men hurt us. You have to pay them. You clearly have money if you can track these people down." Kyle cut her off. "No, Tasha, do not be crude. Zora is a businesswoman. We are not asking for a handout. We are talking about an investment." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, Zora. The firm is going through a temporary cash flow issue. It happens to Amazon. It happens to Tesla. But the underlying assets are solid. If you cover this debt for me, if you clear the balance with Mr. Moretti, I am willing to bring you in as a partner." He paused for dramatic effect. 10% equity, Zora, 10% of the company. Once the Singapore deal closes, that 10% will be worth $5 million. I am offering you a seat at the big table. You will not be the freelancer anymore. You will be a stakeholder in a global enterprise. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat staining his collar. I looked at the desperation behind his eyes. He actually thought I was stupid. He thought he could dazzle me with imaginary numbers and fake shares. He thought that deep down, I was still the little sister desperate for his validation, desperate to be part of his shiny fake world. I let silence hang in the air for a long moment. I pretended to calculate the offer. I saw hope flicker in his eyes. 10%, I repeated slowly. Kyle nodded eagerly. 10%. And full credit for saving the day. We will tell everyone it was a strategic merger. I took a deep breath. I knew exactly what I needed to do to seal his fate. I am interested, I lied. But I do not invest blindly. If I am going to put my own capital on the line to save your neck, I need to know exactly what I am buying into. Anything, Kyle said. Open book. Good, I said. I know you have a shareholders meeting tomorrow morning at the Plaza Hotel. You are trying to raise more capital. Kyle hesitated. How do you know about that? It is my job to know, I said sharply. Here is my counteroffer. I will come to the meeting tomorrow. I will present a financial restructuring plan to your investors. I will use my reputation as an auditor to vouch for the company's health. I will explain that the debt is just a leverage instrument. If I can convince them to stay on board, I will wire the money to Moretti by noon. Relief washed over Kyle's face like a tidal wave. He did not hear the trap. He only heard that I was going to vouch for him. He thought I was offering to cook the books to use my license to legitimize his fraud. He thought I was joining the conspiracy. That is perfect, Kyle said, reaching out to shake my hand. You are a genius, Zora. With your credentials, they will eat it up. We will turn this whole ship around. He gripped my hand. His palm was clammy. See you tomorrow, partner? He grinned. I pulled my hand away. Tomorrow, I said. I turned and walked back to my car. I did not look back at Mama Joyce, who was watching us with confused hope. I did not look back at Tasha, who was already checking her phone to see if the internet was back on. I got into the driver's seat of the black sedan and locked the doors. The interior was cool and quiet. I watched Kyle through the window. He was already pouring himself another drink, laughing, thinking he had won. He thought he had played me. I picked up my burner phone. I opened the encrypted messaging app that connected directly to the field office of the FBI. I typed 3 words. The fish has taken the bait. I hit send, then I added a second message. I will have the subject at the Plaza Hotel tomorrow at 9 a.m., have the forensic team ready to seize the servers, and bring handcuffs. I put the phone down and started the engine. Kyle wanted me to present the truth about his company to his investors. That was exactly what I was going to do. He just had no idea that the truth was going to send him to prison for 20 years. The night before the shareholders' meeting, my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Mama Joyce. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I needed to hear her voice one last time. I needed to know if there was any shred of morality left in her, or if she had completely surrendered her soul to the altar of appearances. I answered in the darkness of my penthouse living room. Zora, are you awake? Mama Joyce whispered. Her voice was hushed as if she was hiding in a bathroom, so Kyle would not hear her. I am working, Mother, I said, watching the city lights blink below me. I am preparing the presentation for tomorrow, just like Kyle asked. Good, good. She sighed, the relief audible in her breath. Listen to me, Zora. I know you and Kyle have had your differences. I know yesterday was frightening with those men in the garden, but tomorrow is a fresh start. Kyle says this meeting is the key to everything. If he secures this new funding, he can pay off the bad men and buy back the house. Everything will go back to normal. Normal, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. You mean the normal where you pretend to be rich while I pay your bills in secret, or the normal where Tasha steals my identity to commit bank fraud? Zora, stop living in the past. Mama. Joyce snapped, her whisper turning sharp. We are talking about survival. Now listen. Kyle sent over his spreadsheets. He said the numbers are a little messy because of the market volatility. He needs you to clean them up. Make them look pretty, Zora. You know how investors are. They do not need to see every little dip and valley. They just need to see the potential. Do not let us down. Do not embarrass your sister. I closed my eyes. There it was. She was not just asking me to help. She was explicitly asking me to cook the books. She wanted me to use my professional license, my reputation, and my skill set to defraud investors so her son-in-law could continue playing dress-up. She was asking me to become a criminal to save the family image. I will do exactly what needs to be done. Mother, I said, my voice steady. The investors will see exactly what Kyle has been doing with their money. Good girl, she said, mistaking my resolve for obedience. You always were the smart one. Just make him look like a winner, Zora. For me. She hung up. I set the phone down and turned back to my 3 monitors. Kyle had indeed sent me his files. They were a disaster. A chaotic jumble of falsified expenses, shell companies, and hidden losses. He had labeled the email "Financials for Zora, please fix." He thought I was going to massage the data. He thought I was going to move decimals and hide losses in the footnotes. He was wrong. I spent the next 6 hours building the most important presentation of my career. I did not fix his numbers. I exposed them. I opened PowerPoint. Slide 1. Title page. KV Capital Risk Assessment and Solvency Audit. Slide 2. The lie. I placed Kyle's projected profit graph on the left. Slide 3. The truth. On the right, I placed the actual bank statements showing a 90% loss. I worked with a cold, clinical precision. I created a flowchart tracking the $200,000 he stole from my parents' house. I used bright red arrows to show how the money went from the mortgage lender to Kyle's personal checking account, and finally to a known gambling syndicate in Atlantic City. I imported the photos my private investigator had taken. The photo of Tasha in the wig signing my name. I placed it next to a zoomed-in image of the forged signature on the loan documents. I titled that slide Corporate Governance and Ethics Violations. By 4 a.m. the presentation was finished. It was 30 slides of pure, unadulterated evidence. It was not a pitch deck. It was an indictment. It was a digital prison cell, and I had built it brick by brick. I saved the file to an encrypted USB drive. Then I emailed a copy to the SEC whistleblower portal just to be safe. I did not sleep. I showered and stood in front of my closet. Today was not a day for hoodies. Today was a day for armor. I chose a bespoke charcoal suit from Tom Ford, tailored to within an inch of its life. It was sharp enough to cut glass. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun. Minimal makeup. No jewelry except for my watch. I did not want to look like a sister. I wanted to look like the Grim Reaper of Wall Street. I drove to the Plaza Hotel as the sun was rising over Central Park. The city was waking up oblivious to the storm that was about to break inside one of its most historic ballrooms. I handed my keys to the valet. He looked at the black sedan, then at my suit and nodded with respect. "Good luck today, ma'am," he said. "I do not need luck," I replied, adjusting my cuffs. "I have receipts." I walked through the revolving gold doors of the plaza. The lobby smelled of lilies and old money. I checked the event board. KV Capital Shareholder Breakfast, Grand Ballroom B. I walked toward the double doors. I could hear the murmur of voices inside. I could hear Kyle laughing, that fake, confident laugh he used when he was terrified. He was in there right now, shaking hands, promising returns he could never deliver, waiting for me to walk in and save him. I reached for the brass handle. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. I felt a sense of calm clarity. Mama Joyce had told me to make the numbers look pretty. She had told me not to embarrass the family. I pushed the doors open. As I stepped onto the plush carpet, the room went quiet. Kyle turned to look at me. He smiled a wide, relieved smile, thinking his savior had arrived. He raised his champagne glass to me. I did not smile back. I gripped the USB drive in my pocket. The fish had not just taken the bait, he had swallowed the hook. And I was about to reel him in. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of expensive cologne roasted coffee and the unique metallic scent of fear. I stood in the back of the room near the heavy velvet curtains, watching Kyle Vance perform the final act of his tragedy. He was standing on a raised stage, bathed in the warm glow of a spotlight that was far too bright for his hangover. Behind him, a massive projection screen displayed a meaningless graphic of a globe connected by glowing blue lines. Kyle was wearing a new suit, likely purchased on credit yesterday, but even the Italian wool could not hide the fact that he was sweating through his shirt. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kyle boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing slightly, "we are not just talking about investment banking. We are talking about a paradigm shift. We are utilizing proprietary blockchain algorithms to decentralized asset management. It is secure, it is immutable, and it is the future of wealth." I scanned the room. There were about 50 people seated at round tables. These were not the church ladies from Mama Joyce's circle. These were institutional investors, hedge fund managers, men and women who ate weak CEOs for breakfast. They did not look impressed. One man in the front row was checking his watch. Another was whispering to his colleague and shaking his head. Kyle was losing them. He sensed it too. His eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for a lifeline. Then he saw me. I stepped out from the shadows of the curtains. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythmic, authoritarian sound. The heads of the investors turned. They saw the Tom Ford suit. They saw the severe bun. They saw the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. I did not look like a sister-in-law. I looked like an executioner. Kyle's face lit up with a relief so profound it was almost pathetic. He actually spread his arms wide as if to embrace me from across the room. "But wait!" he shouted, interrupting his own speech about cryptocurrency. "You do not have to take my word for it. Today I have a special surprise. I have invited an independent financial expert to validate our solvency." He gestured for me to join him on stage. "Please welcome my sister-in-law and the woman who is about to take KV Capital to the next level, the brilliant Zora Vance." There was a polite ripple of applause. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. Kyle met me at the podium. He reached out to shake my hand, and I felt his palm damp with sweat. He leaned in close, his microphone capturing the wet sound of his whisper. "Thank you, Zora," he hissed, desperate gratitude in his eyes. "You are saving my life. Just keep it high level. Tell them we are solid." I pulled my hand away. I looked at him for a long moment. It was the last time I would ever look at him as a free man. "I will be very specific, Kyle," I said. I turned to the audience. Kyle stepped back, yielding the podium to me, looking like a man who had just dodged a bullet only to step on a landmine. I placed my laptop on the lectern. I plugged in the HDMI cable. The screen behind me flickered and went black for a second, clearing Kyle's nonsense graphics. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clear and cold without a tremor. "My name is Zora Vance. I am a certified forensic financial auditor." Mr. Vance introduced me as his sister-in-law, implying that I am here to support family. However, in my profession, numbers do not have relatives. Numbers only have truth. I saw a few of the investors sit up straighter. The boredom in the room evaporated, replaced by a sudden sharp attention. They sensed the shift. "Mr. Vance asked me to present a restructuring plan," I continued. "He asked me to explain the complex financial instruments he uses to generate your returns, and I intend to do exactly that." I pressed the spacebar on my laptop. The screen behind me lit up. It was not a graph of rising profits. It was a stark black slide with white text in a bold sans serif font. The title read, "The Art of Embezzling $5 Million. A Case Study of CEO Kyle Vance." A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was audible. Chairs scraped against the floor as people leaned forward. Kyle let out a strangled noise. He turned around to look at the screen, and his knees actually buckled. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Zora, what is this?" he stammered, his voice picking up on the hot mic. "This is a joke, right? Change the slide." I did not change the slide. I advanced to the next one. "This is a flowchart of your money," I said, addressing the audience directly. The screen displayed a complex web of red lines. On the left were the deposit accounts of the investors in this room. On the right were the destinations: the Mercedes leasing agency, the luxury resort in the Maldives, the high-stakes poker tables in Atlantic City, and at the bottom a massive red block labeled Offshore Shell Corporations. As you can see, I said, pointing to the screen with a laser pointer, exactly 0% of the capital raised in the last fiscal quarter was invested in blockchain or any other legitimate market. Instead, it was laundered through a series of shell companies to fund the CEO's personal lifestyle and to pay off loan sharks. I looked at the man in the front row, the one who had been checking his watch. Sir, I believe you invested $500,000 last month. If you look at line item 4, you will see that your money was used to purchase a diamond necklace for Mrs. Vance and to cover a margin call on a bad bet against the yen. Pandemonium broke out. People were shouting. Kyle was clawing at the HDMI cable, trying to yank it out of my laptop, but I had taped it down. He looked wild, like a trapped animal. Security, someone screamed. Yes, I said calmly, speaking over the chaos. Security is exactly what we need. I clicked the remote one more time. The screen changed to a live feed from the hallway outside the ballroom, where a team of federal agents in windbreakers were waiting for my signal. Kyle looked at the screen, then at me, and finally he understood. I hadn't come to cook the books. I had come to burn them. I clicked the remote again, and the screen zoomed in on the specific line items of the expense report. The room was so quiet that the hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at the investors, who were rapidly realizing that their portfolios had just been incinerated. Let us look at the marketing budget for the third quarter, I said, pointing the red laser dot at a figure of $50,000. Mr. Vance categorized this as client acquisition costs. However, if we cross-reference the transaction ID with merchant codes, we can see that this money was not spent on advertising. It was spent at the Hermes boutique on Madison Avenue. Specifically, it purchased the 2 Birkin bags that my sister Tasha posted on her Instagram last month with the caption, "Blessed and unbothered." A woman in the second row gasped and covered her mouth. She was the wife of the man who had been checking his watch earlier. She looked at her husband with wide, horrified eyes, realizing that her retirement savings was currently hanging on my sister's arm. I moved the laser dot down to the next line. And here we have a $100,000 charge listed as international business development. I continued, my voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. Mr. Vance claimed this was for setting up the Singapore office. In reality, this was a wire transfer to the Four Seasons Resort in the Maldives for a 2-week vacation. That includes the private villa and the first-class flights. There is no Singapore office. There never was. The room began to vibrate with a low rumble of anger. Men were loosening their ties. Faces were turning red. I could hear the word thief being whispered and then spoken louder. But the most egregious misappropriation is this final item, I said, moving to the bottom of the spreadsheet. $300,000 listed as consulting fees paid to a shell company in Nevada. This was not for consultants. This was a direct payment to cover gambling debts. Mr. Vance has been betting against the market with your money and losing spectacularly. That was the breaking point. A man in a gray suit stood up and slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "You told me my money was in bonds, Kyle," he shouted, his face purple with rage. "You said it was secure." Kyle looked at the angry mob he had created. He looked at the screen that was broadcasting his crimes in high definition. Panic overtook him completely. He forgot where he was. He forgot who he was. He only knew he had to stop the images. "That is a lie," he screamed, lunging toward me. She tampered with the files. "Turn it off. Zora, turn it off right now." He scrambled up the steps of the stage, reaching for the laptop. He looked manic, his hair wild, his eyes bulging. He was going to smash the computer. He was going to physically attack me to silence the truth. But he never reached me. 2 men stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. They were not hotel staff. They were private security contractors, ex-military men I had hired specifically for this moment. They moved with a speed and efficiency that made Kyle look like a clumsy child. They stepped in front of the podium, forming a human wall. Kyle ran straight into the chest of the larger guard and bounced off, stumbling back toward the edge of the stage. "Sit down, Mr. Vance," one of the guards said, his voice low and threatening. Kyle froze, panting, looking around for an ally. He looked at the audience, hoping someone would defend him. That is when Tasha stood up. She had been sitting in the front row, stunned into silence, but seeing her husband cornered snapped her back into her delusion. She was wearing a white dress that probably cost more than my car. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are lying," she shrieked, her voice piercing and hysterical. "You are just jealous, Zora. You have always been jealous of us. You are jealous of my marriage. You are jealous of Kyle's success. You made all of this up because you are a lonely, bitter failure who wants to ruin our happiness. Tell them, Kyle. Tell them she is lying." The investors turned to look at her. They did not see a victim. They saw a woman wearing their stolen money. I looked at my sister. I felt a flicker of pity, but I crushed it instantly. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice. "I am not the one you should be worried about, Tasha," I said calmly into the microphone. "And since you mentioned jealousy, let us talk about identity." I pressed the next slide button. The spreadsheet disappeared. In its place, a video file began to play. It was grainy black and white security footage, but the image was unmistakable. It showed a woman standing at a bank teller window. She was wearing a cheap synthetic wig cut in a bob. She was wearing thick-rimmed glasses. She was signing a stack of documents. The room went deadly silent again. Tasha stopped screaming. Her hand went to her throat. "This footage was taken 3 weeks ago at First National Bank," I narrated. "As you can see, this woman is pretending to be me. She is using a fake ID with my name on it. And she is signing a fraudulent loan application to secure funds against a property she does not own." I paused, looking directly at Tasha. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the uncredited Chief Financial Officer of Cave Capital, my sister, who is currently guilty of federal identity theft and bank fraud." Tasha collapsed into her chair, sobbing loudly, covering her face with her hands. Kyle looked at the screen, then at his wife, then at the floor. The fight went out of him. He slumped against the podium, defeated. The investors were not shouting anymore. They were taking out their phones, calling their lawyers, calling their bankers, trying to salvage what was left of their lives. But then a new sound cut through the murmur of the ballroom. It started faint, but grew louder by the second, rising up from the street below and echoing off the high ceilings of the Plaza Hotel. Sirens. Dozens of them. I looked at Kyle. I checked my watch. The FBI was right on time. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a force that rattled the crystal chandeliers. 12 agents in blue windbreakers emblazoned with those 3 terrifying yellow letters poured into the room. They moved with a synchronized efficiency that made the private security guards look like amateurs. The investors scrambled out of the way, pressing themselves against the walls, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of Kyle's career. Kyle saw them, and he made a sound I will never forget. It was a whimper like a kicked dog. He held his hands up, not in surrender, but in a pathetic attempt to ward off the inevitable. He looked at the agents, and then he looked at the angry investors, and finally his eyes landed on me. For a second I thought he might apologize. I thought he might finally take responsibility. But Kyle was a coward to the bone. "It was her idea," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Tasha, who was standing frozen beside him. "She made me do it. She needed the money for the house. She needed the clothes. I just wanted to make her happy. She is the one who forged the signatures. I did not sign anything. It was all her." Tasha stared at her husband, the man she had just defended against a room full of angry millionaires, the man she had committed felonies for. He was throwing her to the wolves to save himself. The betrayal was so absolute that she could not even speak. An agent grabbed Kyle's wrist and spun him around. The sound of ratcheting steel handcuffs cut through the silence. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent said, his voice bored and routine. Kyle did not remain silent. He continued to sob and blubber, dragging his feet as they marched him toward the exit. "I did not know she was doing it," he wailed. I am a victim here. Two other agents approached Tasha. She recoiled as if they were contagious. Do not touch me, she hissed, clutching her designer dress. Do you know who I am? You are a suspect in a federal bank fraud investigation, Mom, the female agent said, pulling Tasha's arms behind her back. When the cold metal touched her skin, the reality finally pierced Tasha's delusion. She realized she was not going to a gala. She was not going to a brunch. She was going to a holding cell. She looked past the agents and locked eyes with me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. You did this, she screamed, struggling against the agent's grip. You are evil, Zora. You are jealous and ugly, and you will rot in hell for this. You ruined my life because you could never be me. I did not flinch. I did not speak. I did not smile. I simply stood there, my hands clasped in front of me, watching the justice system work. I was not jealous. I was justice. I caught the eye of the lead agent, a man I had been emailing for 3 days. I gave him a single sharp nod. He touched the brim of his cap in a silent salute. As they dragged my screaming sister and weeping brother-in-law out of the ballroom, cameras flashed. The press had arrived. Meanwhile, across town in the living room that was about to be foreclosed upon, Mama Joyce sat alone. She was watching the local news channel, which had interrupted its broadcast for breaking news from the Plaza Hotel. She saw the chyron on the screen. Prominent investment banker and wife arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. She saw Kyle weeping. She saw Tasha screaming like a banshee. And then the camera panned to the side and she saw me, standing tall, unbothered, the only Vance left standing. The image was too much for her heart to bear. The illusion she had spent 40 years building had not just cracked, it had been pulverized on live television. The room spun. The sound of the news anchor faded into a high-pitched ring. Her hand went slack, and the remote control clattered to the floor as Mama Joyce slipped into the darkness of a dead faint. 1 week after the arrest, the sheriff arrived at the Colonial House on Oak Street. He did not knock politely. He used a heavy drill to remove the lock on the front door, while a crew of movers began hauling furniture out onto the lawn. It was a foreclosure eviction, and it was happening with brutal efficiency. Mama Joyce sat on her favorite velvet armchair, which was now resting unevenly on the curb near a fire hydrant. She was surrounded by garbage bags filled with her clothes and boxes of knickknacks that no longer had a shelf to sit on. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The gold sequins were gone, replaced by a gray tracksuit. The church hat was missing, revealing hair that had not been styled in days. She watched the neighbors driving by slowly, their phones raised to capture the final fall of the Vance dynasty. I pulled my car up to the curb. I did not park in the driveway because it was blocked by the bank trucks. I parked on the street right in front of her. When she saw me, her face transformed. The despair vanished, replaced by a look of desperate entitlement. She struggled to her feet, clutching her purse, and stumbled toward my car before I even turned off the engine. She believed that this was the rescue. She believed that blood was thicker than bank fraud. Zora. Thank God, she cried out, reaching for the door handle. Pop the trunk quickly. The neighbors are watching. I cannot believe the bank actually did this. It is a misunderstanding. But we can sort it out from your place. I stepped out of the car. I did not pop the trunk. I stood on the pavement wearing jeans and a simple white shirt, looking at the wreckage of my childhood home. Zora, hurry up, Mama Joyce hissed, looking over her shoulder at Mrs. Higgins, who was watering her roses and watching intently. Let us get these bags in the car. I am exhausted. I cannot wait to see this penthouse of yours. I bet you have a lovely guest suite for your mother. I can help you decorate. I looked at her. She was still trying to negotiate. She was still trying to plan the interior design of a home she had never been invited to. You are not coming to my house, Mother, I said. My voice was not loud, but it stopped her dead in her tracks. She laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. Stop joking, Zora. This is not the time. I have nowhere to go. Your father is staying with his brother in Jersey, but there is no room for me there. You are my daughter. You have plenty of room. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I held it out to her. I am not joking, I said. And I am not abandoning you either. I have made arrangements. She took the envelope, her hands shaking. She tore it open, expecting keys. She expecting a check. Instead, she pulled out a single Greyhound bus ticket and a glossy brochure for the Shady Meadows State Assisted Living Facility. She stared at the brochure. She looked at the picture of the shared rooms and the linoleum floors. What is this? She whispered, horror creeping into her voice. This is a state home. This is for poor people, Zora. It is a facility that accepts residents with no assets and no income, I explained calmly. I have paid the first 3 months of fees in advance. It is clean. It is safe. And it is 3 hours away by bus, so no one there will know about the scandal. She threw the brochure on the ground. I am not going to a nursing home, she screamed. I am 60 years old. I am a prominent member of this community. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. And you have a penthouse, Zora. I saw the address on the court papers. You live in the Sovereign. You have 3 bedrooms. You have a view of the river. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. How can you be so selfish? Your house is huge. It is empty. Why can you not just let me stay in one room until Kyle gets out and fixes this? I gently removed her hand from my arm. I did not push her, but I created a distance between us that felt like an ocean. You are right, Mother, I said. My house is very large. It has 3 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. It has a library and a chef's kitchen. It is beautiful. Then take me there, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I shook my head slowly. My house is wide open, Mother, but it does not have a single inch of space for traitors. I looked her in the eye. You chose your side. You chose the lies. You chose the fraud. You chose the son-in-law who used you as a human shield over the daughter who paid your bills. You made your bed on this curb. Now you have to lie in it, or you can get on that bus. I turned around and got back into my car. Zora, wait! She screamed, running after me as I started the engine. You cannot leave me here. I put the car in drive. I checked my rearview mirror. I saw her standing amidst the garbage bags, holding the bus ticket, looking at the brochure she had picked up from the dirt. She looked small. She looked alone. And for the first time in my life, she looked like someone else's problem. I drove away, leaving the debris of the past behind me. I had one more stop to make before this chapter was closed. I had to go to the Federal Detention Center. My sister was waiting. The Federal Detention Center smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies. It was a sensory assault that money could not fix. I walked through the heavy steel doors, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor, a stark contrast to the shuffling of the inmates in their rubber sandals. I was not here to gloat. I was here to close the final ledger. I sat down on the metal stool in the visitation booth. The plexiglass barrier between us was thick, scratched, and dirty. On the other side sat inmate number 8492. It took me a moment to recognize her. Tasha, my sister, the woman who had spent $3,000 a month on beauty treatments, looked like a ghost. Her blonde hair, which she used to obsess over, was limp and greasy, showing inches of dark roots. Her skin was sallow under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. She did not look at me at first. She stared at her hands resting on the stainless steel ledge. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were not filled with remorse. They were burning with a manic, defiant hatred. She picked up the phone receiver slowly. I did the same. Are you happy now, Zora? She whispered, her voice rasping as if she had been screaming for days. You finally did it. You took everything from me. My house, my car, my husband, my freedom. You must feel so powerful sitting there in your expensive suit while I rot in here. I looked at her calmly. I did not take everything from you, Tasha, I said. You gave it away. You traded your freedom for a lifestyle you could not afford. You traded your integrity for a handbag. She slammed her hand against the glass. The guard in the corner took a step forward, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Do not lecture me," she hissed. "This is temporary. Kyle says his lawyer is working on a deal. I will be out of here in 6 months. And when I get out, Zora, I am coming for you. I will sue you for everything you have. I will ruin your reputation. I will make you wish you had never been born." I leaned forward. The glass was cold against my forehead. "Tasha, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice low and steady. "There is no deal. Kyle flipped on you the moment they put the cuffs on him. He gave the FBI everything, the forged documents, the emails, the text messages where you told him to use my credit profile. He is testifying against you to reduce his own sentence." Her face twitched. The cracks were starting to form. "You are lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I am not lying," I continued. "The prosecutor is asking for the maximum sentence. Aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, conspiracy. You are not looking at 6 months, Tasha. You are looking at 15 years. You will be 50 years old when you walk out of here." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. The reality of the number 15 hit her like a physical blow. But that was not the final nail in the coffin. I had one more thing to say. "And by the time you get out," I said, softness entering my voice, "for the first time Chloe will be a grown woman." At the mention of her daughter, Tasha froze, her eyes widened. "Where is she?" she demanded, panic rising in her chest. "Where is my daughter? Did you send her to foster care? Did you give her to strangers?" "No," I said. "Dad has temporary custody. But since Dad is living in a small apartment, I bought a house nearby, a modest house with a big backyard. I am paying for her school. I am paying for her therapy. I am visiting her every weekend." "You stay away from her," Tasha screamed, tears finally spilling over. "She is my daughter. She is going to be just like me." "No, Tasha," I said, shaking my head slowly. "That is exactly what I am preventing. Chloe is a sweet, smart little girl. She asked me why Mommy stole Auntie Zora's name. She asked me if being rich makes people bad." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I told her that being rich does not make you bad, but pretending to be something you are not does. We are raising her to be kind, Tasha. We are raising her to be honest. We are raising her to value people over things. She is going to grow up to be a decent human being, which means she will be nothing like you." Tasha looked at me. The defiance was gone. The anger was gone. In their place was a gaping, terrifying emptiness. She realized in that moment that she had not just lost her freedom, she had lost her legacy. Her daughter was going to grow up knowing exactly who her mother was, and she was going to choose to be different. She dropped the phone. She slid off the metal stool and crumpled onto the floor of the visitation booth. Her shoulders shook with violent, silent sobs. She curled into a ball in her orange jumpsuit, looking small and defeated. I watched her for a moment. I did not feel joy. I did not feel triumph. I felt a heavy sense of closure. The toxicity that had poisoned my family for decades had finally been contained behind concrete walls. I hung up the phone. I stood up and smoothed my suit. I turned and walked toward the exit, not looking back at the woman sobbing on the floor. I had a niece to raise, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. 3 months after the foreclosure auction, I stood on the porch of the colonial house on Oak Street. I held a pair of heavy brass keys in my hand, but they did not feel like a burden anymore. They felt like an opportunity. I had purchased the property through a blind trust, so Mama Joyce would never know who the new owner was. She probably imagined some stranger living in her sanctuary, but she was wrong. The house still belonged to a Vance, just not the one she expected. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. The heavy velvet drapes were gone, allowing sunlight to flood the rooms for the first time in decades. The pretentious gold chandeliers had been replaced with modern, efficient lighting. The marble floors where I was once told I was not good enough to walk were covered in durable, welcoming rugs. I walked into the dining room. The table where I had been banished from Easter lunch was gone. In its place were 4 sturdy oak desks, equipped with computers and printers. I ran my hand along the edge of the nearest desk. This was no longer a shrine to my mother's vanity. It was a workspace. I had not bought the house to live in it. I had my own home high above the city. I bought this house to repurpose it. I turned it into an incubator for female entrepreneurs. It was a place where women from the neighborhood could come to learn financial literacy, to write business plans, and to get the support they needed to build real wealth, not the fake house of cards my family had constructed. I walked outside to the front lawn. A contractor was just finishing installing the sign near the mailbox. It was a modest wooden plaque that read, "The Beatrice Vance Center for Women in Business." Beatrice was my grandmother. She was the only person in my family who ever told me I was smart without adding a condition to it. She was a seamstress who saved every penny she earned in a coffee can, but she had more financial integrity in her little finger than Kyle had in his entire body. Naming this place after her felt like an exorcism. I was scrubbing the walls clean of Mama Joyce's toxic legacy and replacing it with something that actually served the community. The neighbors, Mrs. Higgins included, stopped by to look. They did not sneer. They did not gossip. They nodded with respect. For the first time, this house was not a fortress of exclusion. It was a beacon of hope. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. I felt lighter. The anger that had fueled me for the last year was fading, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. I had balanced the ledger. I had held the corrupt accountable, and I had used the spoils of war to plant seeds for the future. As I turned to lock the door, a car pulled into the driveway. It was not a luxury sedan. It was a reliable American-made car. The driver stepped out and my pulse quickened slightly. It was David, the lead prosecutor, who had handled Kyle's case. We had spent hours on the phone over the last few months, reviewing evidence and dissecting financial statements. I had admired his mind, his relentless pursuit of the truth, and his refusal to be intimidated by high-priced defense attorneys. He walked up the path holding 2 coffees. He was not wearing his court suit today. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking less like a shark and more like a man. "I heard you were having a soft opening today," David said, handing me a cup. "I wanted to see what you did with the crime scene." I took the coffee, smiling. "It is not a crime scene anymore, David. It is a fresh start." He looked at the house, then at the sign, and finally he looked at me. His gaze was steady and warm. He did not look at me like a resource to be used or a problem to be solved. He looked at me like an equal. "It suits you," he said. "Redemption." "It is not redemption," I corrected him softly. "It is reinvestment. I am just putting my assets where they will get the best return." David laughed, a genuine sound that made me smile. "Well, since you are done with the heavy lifting for the day," he said, taking a step closer, "would you consider discussing a new partnership? Over dinner, perhaps. Strictly off the record." I looked at him. For years I had equated relationships with transactions. I gave money, I got tolerance. I gave work, I got ignored. But standing there on the porch of the house I had reclaimed, looking at a man who knew all my secrets and still looked at me with admiration, I realized that the audit was finally over. "I would like that," I said. As we walked toward his car, leaving the empty house behind, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was not walking away from a disaster. I was walking toward a future that was entirely my own. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell. 6 months since I watched the doors of the federal prison close behind my sister. 6 months since I left my mother standing on a curb with a bus ticket in her hand. The seasons have changed outside my penthouse window. The summer heat has given way to the crisp golden light of autumn. But inside my life, the climate has shifted permanently from a storm to a steady calm. I sit here tonight in the silence of my home. It is not the lonely silence that my family predicted for me. It is the rich, peaceful silence of a life that is fully owned. I have a glass of vintage red wine in my hand. It is the same vintage Kyle tried to serve at that disastrous Easter lunch, but this bottle was paid for with my own money. It tastes better this way. It tastes like freedom. I often think about the last thing Mama Joyce said to me before the world fell apart. She told me to stop relying on the family. She said it with a sneer. She said it to shame me in front of strangers. She wanted to make me feel small. She wanted to remind me of my place as the scapegoat. But in her cruelty, she inadvertently gave me the greatest gift of my life. She gave me permission to let go. For years, I thought that being a good daughter meant being a safety net. I thought love was a transaction where I paid for their mistakes, and they paid me with tolerance. I was wrong. Love is not a debt you service, and family is not a suicide pact. They called me selfish for saving myself. They called me vindictive for telling the truth. But I have learned that when you stop enabling a narcissist, they will always accuse you of abandoning them. They view your independence as an attack because your subservience was their foundation. I walk over to the floor-to-ceiling window and look down at the city of New York. It is a grid of millions of lights, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle. I see my reflection in the glass. I do not see the girl in the hoodie who hid in the kitchen. I see a woman who built an empire from the ashes of her rejection. I have realized that independence is the most powerful weapon a woman can possess. When you owe someone, they own a piece of your dignity. When you are dependent on their approval or their money, you are silent. You swallow your truth to keep the peace. But when you stand on your own 2 feet, when you sign your own checks and own your own home, you control your destiny. No one can evict you from a life you built yourself. My phone vibrates on the marble counter, breaking my reverie. The screen lights up the dark room. I walk over and look at the display. Incoming call. Mama Joyce. It is Sunday night. She is calling from the communal phone in the hallway of the Shady Meadows facility. I know exactly what she wants. She wants to complain about the food. She wants to tell me that Tasha is suffering. She wants to ask if I have reconsidered. She wants to know if there is room in the penthouse yet. She wants to drag me back into the mud because misery loathes being alone. I look at her name. A year ago, seeing that name would have spiked my cortisol. I would have felt a wave of guilt. I would have answered. I would have listened. I would have tried to fix it. But the Bank of Zora is closed. And so is the Department of Emotional Labor. I do not feel anger. I do not feel sadness. I simply feel done. I smile a small private smile. I lift my finger and hover over the screen. I do not slide to answer. I tap the small icon in the corner. Block contact. Confirm. The screen goes black. The buzzing stops. The silence returns perfect and unbroken. I pick up my wine glass and turn back to the city. My name is Zora Vance. I was the black sheep. I was the scapegoat. I was the failure. But now I am just Zora, and for the first time in 32 years, I am exactly where I belong. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. If you have ever felt undervalued by the people who were supposed to love you, I hope my story reminds you that your worth is not defined by their treatment of you. You have the power to write a new ending. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice and resilience. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself? I read every single comment. Until next time, remember that the best revenge is not anger, it is a life well lived.